Thank you for joining us for this virtual talk entitled Why Diversity Matters. My name is Matt Wixon. I'm a clinical assistant professor of anesthesiology at the University of Michigan, and along with my colleague, Dr. Scott Markowitz from Washington University in St. Louis, we'd like to present a two-part lecture and interactive discussion today. You'll note that neither of us have any disclosures today. I'll also draw your attention to this slide. RADAR, as these two sessions are entitled, as being under, stands for Raising Anesthesia Diversity and Anti-Racism. It's an NIH-funded national initiative that I am the director of currently. We aim to recruit, connect, and develop a diverse community of academic anesthesiologists through our three main aims. First is outreach, reaching out to high school and college and medical students to draw them to the field of academic anesthesia through mentorship, sponsorship, and initiatives aimed at creating relationships with these future anesthesiologists. The next aim is focused on resident and early career faculty to mentor and to provide curated resources so that they can grow in their knowledge and confidence of issues surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion. Our third aim is at senior leadership to help them develop policies and procedures that are anti-racist in nature and will increase the diversity of our field. We have two main learning outcomes today. The first is to understand the benefit of diversity in team structure. Secondly, to understand actionable steps that you and I can take today to create more diverse teams. So what is diversity? This is Merriam-Webster's definition. And I would ask you to take a moment right now and just think, what is diversity to you? When you hear the word diversity, what do you think of? I would make the argument that diversity is a really big word, not a small word. This is from a business paper in the mid-1990s when they talked about diversity. And they talked about age and class, ethnicity, gender, physical and mental ability, race, sexual orientation, and spiritual practice. And I would encourage you, when you use the word diverse, that you name the type of diversity that you're talking about. Is it racial diversity or geographic diversity, socioeconomic diversity or political diversity? I think that words really do matter, and being thoughtful in how we talk about what type of diversity we are discussing at the time is really important. Today, we'll talk predominantly about racial diversity, but I want you to keep in the back of your mind that diversity is big and broad, and that we should have some thoughtfulness when we're thinking and speaking about diversity. The business world has been talking about diversity as long as medicine has, but I would argue that they've not solved it, they're ahead of us. This is a fantastic paper by Lou Hong and Scott Page from the University of Michigan. In this study, they looked at two groups of people. First were diverse problem solvers in group one. And group two, we would describe as the people who scored highest on the test, high ability problem solvers. And what they found was that the diverse team was actually stronger. They could outperform the team that was made up of everyone who got the highest score on the test. And what I really like about this paper is that they talk about diversity in both terms of identity and functionality. Identity is what we were just speaking of: demographics, culture, ethnicity, training, expertise. However, they talked about functional diversity, which is how people represent and how they solve problems. The way they think, the way they function is diverse. They would make the argument that both types of diversity are really important. There's inherent challenges with both. Honestly, with functional diversity, it can be hard to work with someone who just thinks that much differently than you do. However, what they have postulated and then shown was that your team will be stronger and it will be a more favorable outcome if you have different types of diversity on your team, even when it's hard. Dr. Page is really an economist at heart, and he wrote this fantastic book that I would encourage you to check out called The Diversity Bonus. And in it, he says diversity is more than just doing the right thing. As we have all experienced, the past several years have been very challenging. The COVID-19 pandemic, economic strife, political turmoil, and then racial unrest. And I think that we've all seen and experienced after tragedies in our country over the past couple of years, a renewed focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Dr. Page has been talking about this for years, and he says, while it is the right thing to do, there are benefits more than just that. And in this book, he talks about diverse teams having better outcomes. He's an economist and a business professor deep down. So he talked about improved financial outlook for an organization or a company, department, or an institution. The diverse teams have greater problem solving and they're more innovative. And together, this is the diversity bonus. However, you may have experienced this, you may not have, but it's hard. And it's hard to change the teams or the composition of those we work with. There are a couple key reasons why it can seem really hard. First is that there's a failure to align diversity practices with organizational goals. That you may want to make a change or diversify a team, but if the organizational goals aren't also in that direction, you will face difficulty and potential resistance and struggle. And so understanding your organization, and Dr. Markowitz will talk about this later, culture change, understanding who you are now, what you would like to be in the future, and how will your diversity practices get you there, and how will it align with future goals is incredibly important, but can be a challenge. Secondly, there can be a mismatch between policies and implementation. And by that, I mean what looks good on paper does not actually work all that well. The best laid initiative or outreach on paper can fall apart if the people involved don't understand why you're doing it, or those you're reaching out to don't desire the initiative you've created. So you want to really make sure that the policies and procedures you create can be well implemented. And again, that takes time to understand who you are as an organization and where you want to get. And you have to face the things you've done well, the things you've struggled in, and everything in between, so that you can design policies and implement policies that are tractionable and that will have buy-in broadly. However, not all is lost. There are strategies for success. I've touched upon this point, but clearly defining what you're trying to achieve and why is so incredibly important. Why do we want to increase the racial diversity in our trainees? Why do we want to have more gender diversity in our research teams? Understand what you're trying to achieve and why is a way to set yourself up for success from the get-go. And then you can't copy and paste. Well, I believe deeply that we need to collaborate and we don't need to reinvent the wheel for every initiative or policy change or good idea, you can't just copy and paste from one institution to the next. What works here may not work there. It may work incredibly well, but it may not, and you can't get disheartened if it's a struggle or it doesn't work quite right. And this is where I think a community of collaboration is so incredibly important, so that we can learn from each other's mistakes, that we can celebrate each other's successes, take what works from your colleagues and leave behind what doesn't. Next, good design with good implementation. I keep coming back to this theme of really understanding what is our culture, what is our departmental or organizational vision? Who do we want to be? Who have we been? What are successes? What are failures? Taking all of that knowledge and coalescing it into good design and then good implementation. The best laid and best planned initiative will fail if it's not implemented well. And lastly, win hearts and minds. This is something I am incredibly passionate about. And I think that increasing diversity in the field of anesthesia is important for a lot of reasons. And so I talk about it. And I listen when people say, but what about this? Or this makes me nervous. Or have you considered this? It seems that at times we've lost the ability to talk to one another. And so having an air of humility to say, this is what I believe and this is why, I think goes a long way, and to be willing to listen as much as you're willing to speak about what you are passionate about will help you be successful. We've talked about the business world and why, and some data and some studies around why diverse teams in business are helpful. But what about healthcare? What about research? I would make the argument that there are myriad benefits to diverse healthcare workforce. And again, when I talk about diversity, I'm talking about all kinds of diversity. Advancing cultural competency. We'll understand our patients better. We'll understand those we do research with and for better by having a diverse healthcare workforce that can say, I have that lived experience. I can share why they're thinking X, Y, or Z. It increases access to high quality healthcare. Representation matters in medicine. It'll strengthen the medical research agenda. When we have PIs and research leaders who are diverse, we're going to look at different diseases that maybe have never been studied before, or we're going to bring in different study patients or ask a different question because we think differently. So we'll have a stronger research agenda. And we'll also ensure optimal management of healthcare system. If we believe, as I do, that diverse teams are stronger and more creative and more innovative, then that needs to exist at all levels of healthcare. We're rapidly becoming a more ethnically and culturally diverse country. And it's projected that in 2050, we'll be a majority minority country. As I said, representation matters. And we've been talking now for decades about increasing the racial diversity of healthcare providers. And while some strides have been made, we're nowhere near matching the general population in America. There is work to be done. This is a really fascinating study from 2018. It was done in Oakland County, California. They recruited 1,300 Black men in barbershops and flea markets. And they offered free screening for common conditions, hypertension, diabetes. About half of the men participated. And of those participants, half of them had a Black doctor or racial concordance, half of them had a white doctor. And what they were looking to see was, does what a doctor looks like matter to patients. What they found was the study subjects who had racial concordance or had a Black doctor were 18% more likely to undergo non-invasive screening processes, like a screening BP for hypertension. However, when it started to be invasive testing, so a blood draw to look at a hemoglobin A1C to screen for diabetes, that number increased. So we know that it actually does matter. Having diverse healthcare workforce and a diverse research workforce does matter for patient care and likely patient outcomes. This then begs the question, how do we improve? These are questions that I ask myself when I think about trying to challenge my biases, or if I'm feeling uncomfortable in a situation. I ask myself, do I treat all people with respect regardless of age, race, religion, or sexual orientation, or how they look, or gender, or weight, or what their primary language is? Ask yourself, how do I treat people who are different than me? Next, do I encourage people of different backgrounds to work together to create unity? As a leader, am I thoughtful in how I am creating teams? Do I forge inclusivity so that all feel welcome and valued in the teams that I create or not? Am I sensitive to cultural differences? And I think this is one that can be hard for many people. They may struggle to say, should I ask them about their background or why they may do something a certain way? And what I've found when I have the courage to ask a question is that people often really want to talk about this part of them that is so important. And I have to get over my own concerns or fears of asking the wrong question or causing offense. I think that if we can approach this with humility and curiosity, we can broaden our perspectives and become better leaders, better team members for increasing our knowledge. Ask yourself the question, do I believe all people are equal? And do I value opportunities to learn more about people of other backgrounds? And lastly, do I support efforts to promote diversity? And what does that look like? I think that can look different for many people, how they like to promote diversity. But I think if you're asking yourself, what am I doing today to create an enhanced culture, a more inclusive culture where everyone feels respected and valued and important to the team? Those are the questions we should be asking ourselves. And it's a process, it's a continual journey. I spend a lot of time thinking about these things, and I'm still well on this journey of trying to understand myself, my organization, my department, those I work with, the teams that I get to help be a part of and to lead. These are the questions that we can ask ourselves continually and grow. I hope that this talk has made you understand why I believe that diversity matters. We've talked about some data to say that teams are stronger, and we've talked about some strategies about how we can increase diversity, how we can think about inclusivity. I look forward to our discussion. Thank you for your attention.
Hello and welcome to RADAR, Raising Anesthesiology Diversity and Anti-Racism, Session Part 2, Microaggressions and Unconscious Bias, and Beginning to Change Culture. These RADAR sessions have been prepared by Matt Wixon from the University of Michigan and me, Scott Markowitz, from Washington University in St. Louis. Neither Matt nor I have any financial conflicts to disclose. We will not discuss off-label, prescribing, or investigational drugs. We will, however, discuss topics that are critically important to all of us and center on issues that are affecting our ability to care for patients and each other, and the well-being of colleagues and patients are definitely at risk. Presentation, and there are 2 learning outcomes we will deliver: review expressions of unconscious bias in anesthesiology and consider pathways to culture change. Those learning outcomes is important enough for this topic. While every journey must start at the beginning, the journey is still the important thing. I therefore will humbly suggest that the outcome that I desire from this talk is a commitment or recommitment to take action, to build a culture that we and our patients deserve. The unconscious or conscious expression of certain biases is known to be harmful to others, to the culture of trust and collaboration so important in our clinical care, our research, our teaching, learning, and innovating. The unconscious or conscious expression of certain biases is also rampant, and few people are knowledgeable enough, skilled enough, or prepared to intervene and make the changes needed to reduce or eliminate these harmful behaviors from our work environments. A core reference by Sue and colleagues from 2007 is a great starting point for understanding the nature of racial microaggressions, micro-insult, micro-invalidation, and micro-assault. While focusing on racial microaggressions, the fact of these experiences can be felt by any member of a marginalized or underrepresented group and can include race and also gender and other protected classes. The term microaggression has some controversy, and there are proposals to make a change. Since this is the most common term used, we will use it here. One of the terms I do like better is subtle acts of exclusion. The term micro or subtle are possibly perceived as diminishing the impact of the event. However, they are also useful in helping others to recognize that these things are often not noted by the person delivering the comment, the look, or the body language, or any other behavior that is perceived as these, and also by those not aware of the impact of these actions on their friends and colleagues who are witnessing it. These actions may be truly unconscious. It is also possible for them to be outward expressions of biases embraced by the actor. Since we can only know if someone would share that with us, we feel it is much more likely to build an ally when defensiveness is not a portion of the initial feedback. Most upstanders, people who seek to intervene in observed microaggressions, will generally assume no intent to harm on the part of the actor who has chosen their behavior or statement without the intended offense. Whether explicit or implicit, these biases have been built in each of us through our normal growing and learning processes. This means that they are habit, they are heuristic that we use to interpret and interact with the world, and they're likely automatic phrases or behaviors without conscious effort on our part, making them hard to recognize and even harder to prevent, let alone rewire that automatic pattern. It is truly work to become aware of our biases and work to prevent them from being expressed in ways that harm others and ourselves. There are myriad examples of microaggressions identified by Sue's team and additional ones recognized in healthcare settings by other researchers, especially gender and racial acts of exclusion. Some common themes and examples will be shared here. There are many examples, and these are chosen for the ease of explaining them in the interest of time. It is often necessary for us to hear about these themes and memes before we can begin to recognize them in ourselves and others. This is how unconscious our biases are, and how easily we can say something or act in a way that harms someone else psychically. Alien in one's own land. An assumption that someone who does not appear white is not from the U.S. Where are you from? No, really, where are you from? Is a common phrase, and this is a theme that shows up in microaggression assessments on a regular basis. Color blindness. This ignores someone's individual lived experience and the possibility that they experience the world differently than you do, or that the world experiences them differently than they experience me. "I don't see color" is a phrase that is quite offensive to most people who have a lived experience of being in a marginalized or underrepresented group. Denial of individual experiences is also known as blaming the victim. In racism, a question might be asked, "Are you sure there isn't some way you contributed to the traffic stop?" If it's gender bias, a statement might be, "Was it the way you dressed that caused them to make that sexual comment?" The myth of meritocracy suggests that a statement might be, "I believe the most qualified person should get the job." This does not take into account the nature of challenges that people who come from underrepresented groups or underprivileged groups might have had to overcome in order to be in the running. And that lived experience is valuable both for that job as well as for being at the table in discussing ways to improve the culture. The myth of meritocracy suggests that everyone can succeed if they work hard enough. This is a denial of the lived experience that is associated with the systemic biases and challenges that some people face while others do not. Misidentification. This might be someone addressing a male intern instead of the female attending surgeon, or someone who declared that the tech has arrived in the operating room when it was a black attending anesthesiologist. Someone said they had not met the doctor yet, even though the doctor, a person of color, had introduced himself when he spoke with them 10 minutes earlier. How about differential treatment? Addressing the older doctor at the code with the question when the code was being managed by the younger doctor. Sending professional development emails to only those faculty who do not have young families. Environmental treatment providing, say, breast milk pumping stations for nurses, but not for faculty. These environmental microaggressions might also include having all of the portraits in the hallways and conference rooms be of white men. In each of the protected classes, and this list is approximate from U.S. employment regulation, and may be different in other areas, there are circumstances in which this bias has been seen in healthcare, both in the delivery of care and within the organizations. In speaking about it, we often consider behaviors that come from unjust bias to be a lapse in our professional duty to treat others fairly or to treat others with respect. And unfortunately, when we do not see the harm we're causing or systems we are perpetuating, we are not in a position to choose a different path. Awareness and then understanding are required as necessary, though incomplete, first steps. There is no longer any doubt that acts of exclusion are common in our work environments and that they have negative impacts upon the well-being of our members, especially those underrepresented in medicine. There is also an impact on the organizational trust and team cohesion, and the consequences of these harmful behaviors can augment the challenges we already work to overcome in our critical communication. The fact of limited diversity and limited equity in leadership opportunity and rank in academic medical centers, and the lack of appreciable movement in most of these areas, suggests that the systems in place are not self-correcting, and that the environment is still not supportive of underrepresented faculty, equity, and justice. There is a growing body of literature that demonstrates the fact of race and gender-based microaggressions in anesthesiology. A specific case of which you are likely aware is the lack of gender equity in cardiothoracic anesthesiology. This may reflect working environments that are experienced differently for men and women, or schedules that have the effect of excluding qualified women candidates, often without any consideration of the consequences of having such a lack of diversity in the practice and in the entire field. Now that we have discussed learning point number 1, review expressions of unconscious bias, we can consider learning point number 2, pathways to culture change. What does it take to change a culture? To begin, a vision of the desired culture is critical. This is especially important because there are so many people and systems involved in any organization that the effect of any one intervention may be difficult to predict. A vision will allow for a test with and after interventions as to whether the intervention has moved the organization toward the vision or not. The vision of an organization that does not foster microaggressions or subtle acts of exclusion will necessarily be diverse. To maintain an environment in which we must always be considering that there cannot be a single in-group nor any out-group. By having diverse voices, knowledge, experiences, and expertise, and including them in the assessment, analysis, planning, and execution of our change initiatives, we are taking advantage of the resources we have. A welcoming environment that fosters a sense of belonging is a prerequisite for retaining and recruiting a diverse membership. But didn't I just say that we need a diverse membership to build a better culture? Which comes first, you might ask? This is one of the hardest parts of change. The process must continue through ever-improving steps until the vision can be achieved. To aid with the recruiting and retention of diverse perspectives, we must practice justice in our appointments, our promotions, and leadership recruitment, as well as recognitions. Since our missions serve a diverse patient population, it is often a recommendation that the vision of diversity among the organization represent the population that is served as much as possible. In order to be prepared to value and leverage diversity, practice inclusion, and foster a welcoming organization that fosters a sense of belonging among all members, we must make an intentional step to declaring a vision, learning what we must do to be able to move through awareness into understanding, and critically, to take action. We began this presentation with 2 objectives: to review the expressions of unconscious bias and to consider the pathways to improve our cultures. In doing that, we ended on the main point of awareness and understanding, which is that they are not meaningful unless and until we take action on behalf of the culture we all deserve. Your commitment to our patients, to the research that serves them, and to each other, our colleagues. And I thank you for your attention. Well, what do you think? We could have a discussion, we could answer questions, we could have a debate, we could play a game.
I give it a few more minutes. I suspect there'll be more that are joining.
Oh, I see. So that moving
Great.
over on the link.
Yes.
Okay. Hey, Max. Hi, Tracy. I don't know if you guys can hear us yet.
Hear you loud and clear, thanks. Well, I have a question. If you don't mind, I'll just kick it off. I'm wondering how the panelists feel we've made progress as a field of anesthesiology, say today with radar in existence versus maybe a few years ago.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And first off, thanks for everyone who is here. I know people will be streaming in over the next few minutes. But the goal this time is for us to have a discussion. Well, we wish we were all in Honolulu, looking at the lovely weather, having this discussion. We're just grateful that you would be here on a Sunday afternoon to talk about something that's very important to all of us in this room, and certainly important to the field. And so to start to answer your question, I would say we have made some progress. The fact that we're at one of the most preeminent meetings in our field, and we have leaders in the field who have joined to talk about this, is a sign of the progress, right? Radar is a sign of progress of major academic institutions really declaring diversity and inclusivity as being a pillar of progress and being a pillar of them. So I think that we've started. However, we've got a long way to go. We all had match day on Friday. which was a great day. And spending time on Twitter and seeing a lot of the departments and seeing that the face of anesthesia is starting to look a little bit different is progress. However, we still, if you look at the raw data, and this is a paper Buki and I did a couple of years ago, the last 20 years have been static. And so it's going to be over the next 5 and 10 and 15 and 20 years that we're going to have to continue moving forward. And then I hope we're going to be able to look back and say, wow, those initiatives that we started, in 2019 and 2020 and 2021, those steps have paved the way for change. George, I see your hands up.
Yes, so again, I want to thank you both for the lectures and for all of your efforts and for being inspirations. I wanted to touch on a point that we were talking about a little bit the other day at the AUA meeting, which is, how do we have a broader impact? We could be doing a great job within our department, and yet we're sending our colleagues out to perioperative areas, procedural areas, clinics, critical care units. We touch on many aspects of the clinical enterprise, and there is a gradient of culture. And, I've learned this, and I've got a lot more to learn, but just hearing some of the stories and just being shocked that somebody going one floor up from the ORs into a medical procedure area, that they're experiencing a radically different culture. And so it really does seem like a mosaic of subcultures, and how do we, as leaders and as members of a community, start to penetrate those areas so that our work isn't really lost on our community as they go out to these other places across the enterprise. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. And since it sounds like others can share too, Matt and I welcome it to be a dialogue among the entire group and not just back and forth with us, although certainly we're happy to chat. I'd add my thoughts to that. The question of how we influence others. So let's say we're doing our work at home and we look at it and we say to ourselves, okay, what can I do to help prepare our people to be able to influence the environment? And then how do we have that influence and how do we carry that with us? There are all these, high income generators for the hospital and the medical center, which tend to have a lot of weight or a lot of power, but don't necessarily align as strictly with the culture that we're looking for or the communication styles and patterns that we'd like to have. And we sometimes see these patterns happen within anesthesia departments as well. So, I wouldn't say that anyone has finished doing their own internal work. The answer to that is that looking at it as a long-term prospect, the idea of choosing the culture that we would like as the way that we would also interact with others, and trying to make the assumption that others would also like to be in that environment in which the assumptions are generally positive and that there's a sense of supportive growth opportunity and feedback opportunity, a learning culture, a coaching culture even, would be great. And how I interact with someone else will contribute either positively or negatively to my ability to influence that. So while we have only direct influence on our own personal selves, and while as a department, we tend to have the biggest influence on our department members, the truth is that it still will carry forward to some degree in how we interact. Now, there may be bigger disruptive changes that need to take place occasionally, right? There may be an example that any of us have in our center in which someone is so disrupting of the changes that we're looking to make in culture that there needs to be some adjustment made to how they can communicate or how much influence they have. But those are things that generally systems are unwilling or unable to do in a timely fashion. And so on a person-by-person basis is really the current optimal practice. And I think, Buki, you're going to speak to that.
Yeah, thank you for, first of all, thanks for such a wonderful panel. It's just full of gems. And just looking at the the picture I'm seeing on my screen gives me a lot of hope for our specialty. And the reason I say that is because diversity, equity, and inclusion problem, or whether it's a systemic racism and things, is not a problem that Black and brown people can solve on their own. It's a problem that has to, that we all must get involved. And when I look at everybody on my screen, it just gives me a lot of hope. Because in order to solve the problem, we are going to need people that I call unexpected allies. What do I mean by that? These are people that have no skin in the game, with all the pun that can convey. In other words, you do it because it's the right thing, and sometimes it may have significant political consequences. Historically, if men were not interested in the women's right to vote movement, guess what? It would not have happened. Men had to step up to allow women to vote. If John McCain hadn't cast that vote on the floor of the Senate, the Affordable Care Act will have died. So that, to me, is the role of unexpected allies. Most times when I give health disparity lectures in various settings, invariably it's people that look like me that ask the question. And I keep prodding people that, oh, hold on a minute. I can't solve the problem because I don't have in fact, I don't have the mental power to solve the problem. Unless we all put our heads together to try to solve the problem, guess what? We're going to be here in another decade or two and still repeating the same issues. But when I look at the way this has been discussed and the steps that leaders in our society, the steps that they're taking, it gives me a lot of hope. And it just makes me understand that, people are beginning to understand that privilege can be blinding sometimes. You say, hey, it's the person that feels it that knows it. So thank you for such a wonderful panel.
Thank you. Dr. Vetter?
Sure. Well, first off, I want to thank you both for a very thoughtful presentation. It educated me on a couple of things. One, the importance of putting an adjective in front of diversity. I have had this proclivity for using that word as kind of a generic construct, when in reality, it deserves an adjective to give it more specificity. I want to congratulate you on your paper that's coming out in a mini bundle very soon on your radar program. I'm very pleased to see that we're going to be publishing that. I hope I don't sound self-promoting, but I'm also very, I guess, heartened that we have installed, with the Board of Trustees' support, an executive editor for diversity, equity, inclusion, who will be Paloma Toledo. I'm very much looking forward to her voice within the tent, and getting her perspective on things. Buki is recently installed as our ESC for health disparities, which I think is awesome. The one thing I just would propose, I know I'm getting to something here, I promise, is that we have chosen 2 co-ESCs for social media. Anesthesia and analgesia has been a little, I won't say a laggard, we just have not fully realized the opportunity, going to a SWOT analysis of social media. And we chose 2 women, one of color. This will be announced soon. And one of the things I would like to see us do, I can speak for Jean-Francois in this regard, Jean-Francois Pité is the editor-in-chief, is that we would really like to see how we can utilize social media as an opportunity to build upon these fundamental kind of budding embryonic nascent efforts in diversity, equity, inclusion for our journal and our specialty. Tracy, I want to give you a shout out. I listened this morning in awe to your campfire session that you had with Karen Gibbs and Alice Coombs. It was awe-inspiring, to be honest.
Thank you.
So I'm glad I was able to maybe not sit at the inner ring at the campfire, but at least feel the warmth. How's that? Okay.
Very nice. Thank you.
Yeah. So anyway, that was just a few passing observations. I'd love to see Scott and Matt, you all reach out to the new co-executive section editors for social media. You know, not that that's the only way we can promote this. There's plenty of other ways, and that's what Paloma's going to help us. But I think that's a front and center way that our journal can reach out to the larger world out there. And it's an untapped opportunity up to this point. So with that, I'll just put my hand down.
Well, thank you for those comments, and we would love to interact with them. And I think that brings up the broader point of so many departments and institutions are doing really great work, but we just don't know that one another are doing these things, you know, and often we're just losing momentum because we're trying to reinvent the wheel. So for example, UCSF, EHI has created a phenomenal health disparities curriculum for their residency, and how we should be promoting that, and we should be just, you know, freely sharing that, but we don't yet have all the tools to talk to one another. And so that's why it's so important to have these, you know, to have our major journals saying this matters. Let's talk about all these efforts that are happening. And similarly, social media will be a boon to us to just talk. You know, I follow Twitter only to see what's going on. I don't post very often, but the amount of events and terms and initiatives that I learn about just from following Twitter. You know, I was able to watch match day happen across the country in our specialty in real time on Friday on Twitter, something I'd never really experienced before. And students that I'd interacted with who I know are going to be change agents in the field who didn't end up at Michigan, ended up at some of our partner institutions, and I'll be able to connect with them still and say, hey, remember this thing we were talking about? We can still do it. And actually, maybe we'll have outsized impact because you're not here within our department. We can bring more departments together. So I love that idea. And then I also want to harken back to your other point about putting an adjective in front of diversity. And I found that to be helpful to myself because it puts me in a mind frame. What kind of diversity am I talking about here? Which is really important because it's easy to get caught up in racial diversity, especially in the last couple of years with all of the political and societal events that have happened, you know. But I've actually found when I name the type of diversity, people who might feel a little uncomfortable or unwelcome in DEI talks, all of a sudden perk up because they identify with a specific type of diversity we're mentioning, whether that's gender diversity or geographic diversity. All of a sudden they say, oh, like there's room for me in this tent too. And so what might have felt adversarial or uncomfortable, or I'm going to lose something here if someone else is winning, all of a sudden you see this realization of I'm welcome here too. Thanks for bringing up that point. It's one of my.
And I think if we're not careful, it becomes transactional, and that's a problem. First off, to your point, I think it's easy to work in a silo. We all suffer from that. Whether it's when I did pediatric pain for a living, I was an N of one, right, and the lone wolf, and it was lonely. But so we can end up being siloed. So I think that's hugely important, is that sense of community. The other thing that is a delicate issue, and I would like for us, so it's not transactional. That's the one thing that I appreciate you conveying. The other thing is I'm in the midst of a social justice course in my narrative medicine training. And one of the constructs is white fragility, which, I have to come to terms with myself personally. And this is really not the audience for that. It's more of a personal exploration. But what you're touching on, Matt, and I think also Scott, is this propensity for white fragility. And it's not something we can or should do a deep dive on in this venue, because we're probably preaching to the choir, as they say, but it is something we need to be cognizant of, both as a journal and maybe less so as a society. The IARS, I think, has a greater ability to be not immune to that. But anyway, I just think I have to be sensitive to that, as well as the other members of the editorial board, just speaking collectively. So.
Thanks for that. We'll go George and then Mike.
Matt, you and I have had this conversation. I've actually talked to Michael about it as well. And something I want to put out there, and that's the question of political diversity. And, you know, this is just an interesting topic. And I know there are a lot of complexities and nuances as, you know, as we think about our own department and, you know, the spectrum of political thinking and sort of the assumption, well, often the assumption that, you know, diversity is associated with one political, you know, preference or ideology versus another. How do we grapple with this so that we really are, you know, talking about the broad tent, you know, that we're able to speak to many people across a wide array of political sensibilities and convey the essential message and get people engaged. And, you know, to Buki's point, to have some of the unexpected allies appear. What are anybody's thoughts on that? I'm really very eager to learn and understand.
It's loaded, George. It's loaded. One of the issues with politics when we think about it beyond just the medical center, and we think about politics as kind of national politics or political parties, that is where the political parties tie themselves to issues with the intention of bringing together a coalition large enough in every of the areas in order to elect people from their party. It's about getting elected. Now, getting elected may have other motivations to it. The ability to, you know, create laws or to change laws, et cetera, may be the motivation, but it isn't the primary motivation for how the coalitions are built. And it's not a philosophical difference. There's nothing coherent about any one political party over the course of 30 or 40 years. But within short windows, there are these things. So I think that when we tie one coalition to another coalition to another coalition because we get two political parties to pick from, it becomes very easy to see us as polarized in two ways. But there isn't any issue that has only two sides. There isn't any concern or approach that has only two. And so I think the idea that things are tied together like that is a way that we adapt to simplify our approach to the world. I don't want to have to think about every issue or know about every issue. So I align myself with one particular group and they tell me what to do on these issues that I haven't gotten deep into. But if I do get deep into any one of them, I may differ in my opinion about how I would think or approach it. And I think that's one of the things, is to just sort of allow for the idea that not everybody who ascribes themselves to a particular political party has to align with all of the elements that seem to be affiliated with that when we look at national politics. And that's the hope that one has. That's the open mind that one takes into a conversation with someone who is a member of another party and as outspoken maybe for their party as one might be for the other party. The idea of that open mind, the idea that there are issues within there that the parties may say they differ on, but that I can actually cross a line. But that's the hopeful thought anyway.
Mm-hmm. And I think you also have to have the humility to actually have those conversations with people who are different than you, right? And whether that's politically or gender or whatever type we're talking about, you have to go into those conversations, one, a bit curious to actually understand their position, right? To truly listen to them and it not just be, I'm formulating my answer already because I know you're wrong and I'm going to prove to you why you are wrong here, but actually go into those of, you know, at the end of the day, we're two human beings who might think about this differently, but I want to understand. And I think, you know, unfortunately, over the past 5 or 6 or 8 years, we've lost that ability to act, you know, to think that someone on the other side is still a human being. You know, the level of vitriol and emotion has been so amped up. You know, I haven't been in politics all that long, or, you know, following politics all that long, but it seemed better 10 or 15 years ago, you know, that there wasn't so much division. Maybe there was, and I wasn't, aware of it. But I do think that, and George, you and I have talked about this. There's people in our department who differ significantly from me politically, but we like each other at the end of the day. And so we can actually enter into those conversations that on the surface level seem like they would end very poorly. Our discussions, would end up with us not talking to each other ever again. But we actually, love each other enough to say, I just disagree with you, but thank you for telling me like how you think. Let me think about that some more, and maybe we'll get there. So, and I think we need to model it, right? I think we actually should be leading to say, let's talk about the political diversity that we have instead of, and that's going to bring people together to say, I actually can say what I think here, and I'm not going to be labeled X, Y, or Z for one comment.
This is a phenomenal conversation, and I really do think, that the political diversity issue is a real challenge. I think part of it is just amplified by people. You can customize your news content so precisely to confirm your own beliefs. And that's I think it's what's changed over a decade is you couldn't do that as well as you can now. Is you can just tune into something that's so perfectly just, you have a tendency to just confirm your own beliefs, and try to have the metacognition to recognize that and challenge yourself is really hard to do. And I think most people just don't do that very well. But that was my comment about this. My question I was going to have, if we have just, I know this is ending right now, but a real quick question, Matt and Scott, I know we already knew this was going to be a fantastic talk, and thanks again for having it. And you spoke a lot about just like kind of grassroots approaches to this, championed by leadership, but kind of, focusing on the individual conversations that are happening, day to day. And I think that's, a great approach and is perhaps the best approach. And a question I have for you is, do you think there's a need or for a metric, or, is there a metric that already exists that we can use to track progress? And maybe this is something I'm ignorant of already, if it does exist, but, or maybe it's that we just don't even need a metric for this, but it's just more of a feeling, particularly among groups who, are historically marginalized or excluded, that we just continue to check in over time. I mean, do you think there's a need for a metric? And if so, does it already exist? And can you enlighten me? Or if it doesn't, what do you think that metric would be?
I'll take the first stab at that. That's a fantastic question. So I'll give an example actually here at the University of Michigan. In the early 2000s, the university went to the Supreme Court for their kind of affirmative action practices, right? So they were trying to increase the racial diversity within the undergraduate campus, and they had done so really successfully over time. It was slow progress, but it was certainly viewed as progress. Right, so a famous Supreme Court case involving President Bollinger at the time, and they were successful. However, the residents of the state of Michigan then had a ballot proposal to basically get rid of affirmative action. So if you're talking about metrics, and so that was Proposition 2, and that's still the law of the state of Michigan now. Since Proposition 2 was in place, the number of underrepresented people as undergrads at the University of Michigan has decreased by 40%. So, and I use that example to say the university had set a metric and had policies in place to try to reach that metric, and they were having progress. When the ability to have a metric was taken away, it decreased. So I would make the argument, yes, there should be some kinds of metrics. And of course, here in the state of Michigan, we have laws saying we can't, right? So we can't do those things. Other states have different laws, and it's possible. But we're all scientists, and we all love data. If you're not measuring something, I think that's how we get in the scenario that we're in now, where we look back 20 years ago, and the racial diversity within the field of anesthesia is pretty static. And so I do think that as much as we can, we should have some metrics or set goals for what we're going to look like in many types of diversity. And that doesn't just have to be who our trainees are. I think you can have those metrics about what do editorial boards look like, right? What does leadership look like? What is our process
look like for creating leaders or putting people in positions? Because I think that when you start to think about equity and start thinking about what future state you would like to have, you can move towards it, right? And you can measure it and you can say, where are we now versus a year ago? Where do we want to be a year from now? So that's what I'll say about metrics. I think they're helpful. I think they're helpful, but they're not without, potential risk.
So Matt, I just want to jump in real quick because you just touched on about editorial boards. We had our IARS sponsored symposium, journal symposium on Friday, which I moderated, which was a lot of fun. It was incredible. Just from my perspective, I mean, Jean-Francois was there, of course, but so was Hugh Hemmings and Evan Karish and Cynthia Wong, the chair at the University of Iowa. And one of the questions I posed to Hugh, because he didn't talk about it under his opportunities, was what are the opportunities for us to enhance the diversity of our peer review database, peer reviewer database, and in turn, how do we use that as a springboard for diversifying and providing greater equity and inclusion for our editorial boards? And it was an interesting question. And what Hugh responded, and I put this out here to get some reaction, is some people are not comfortable in providing that demographic information, which I guess I'm a little surprised, but maybe I'm not. I don't know. Again, because we grapple with how get to the issue of metrics, right? You can look at the editorial board of any journal and get a ballpark idea, perhaps, of gender. Maybe not. That could be a little invalid, but you can't really infer much more than that unless you ask specific questions, which can be a little delicate and not always well received, because people then might sense consciously or subconsciously they're being profiled. So it's a bit of a paradox there. And I would welcome people's thoughts about that operationally.
In terms of metrics, there are a couple of formal metric type things out there that anyone can utilize. There is the diversity engagement survey, which is a relatively short 22 question survey that any institution or department can give to their people. And then on a larger, more national scale, there's the Health, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Dashboard, which is voluntary. And it looks really at 4 main components: community partnerships, data collection and stratification, diversity and inclusion leadership, and last is cultural competency training. And the institution as a whole submits to this, and their metrics are basically placed against the metrics of the entire nation so that they can see where they are against the nation in these 4 domains. In terms of Dr. Vetter, there's still a problem with trust out there in terms of profiling. People don't know why you want this demographic information. What are you going to do with this demographic information? It's going to take time to get people to really understand that you want to use this demographic information for the betterment and not for something ill. So I would simply say to you, keep with it, stick with it. I've seen some people that have actually put in hard stops in order to, from moving on to a next question until they actually answer the demographics. But therein again, with that kind of, doing that piques people's minds more about what do you really want this for? And they just won't answer the survey. So I think actions speak louder than words. Whether or not people answer it, you can find out someone's demographics from their name. We live in a world of Google at this point in time. And yes, it's extra work, but keep it going. Keep it going.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dr. Straker. and to Dr. Vetter, I would just say, be very transparent again. Why are we asking this? I think if the editorial board said, we have a commitment to, diversifying our peer review process, and we think we should do it because people are markedly more interested then, right? They will say, oh, I believe in that too. And so if I can give this information, that may help start to, turn the tide. So I think transparency goes a long way to build that trust.
Much appreciated.
I mean, look at the ABA. I mean, when they first started with this, no one was really stepping up because they were thinking that you were going to use it to not choose us to be on the boards. But I think, as Matt was saying, if you clearly state what is the goal and what are you going to do with this information, and your actions support it, I think that people in time will volunteer their demographics.
Absolutely. And I'll direct everyone's attention to the chat as well. Summer's comment on demographic questions not being straightforward. People of mixed race may identify with both races. That's an incredibly important comment that you brought up there. And so, we need to be inclusive in what our demographics are as well, because that's certainly, a growing population. And then Mike Mathis sent a link to a faculty career development tool that's now recognizing DEI work and contributions as part of promotion. Dr. Avedon, I know you had your hand raised, so I want to make sure to give you some time.
Thank you, Dr. Wixon. I wanted to pick up on the question from George Mashur from earlier. And it is definitely something that I think about a lot. And I do love what Buku put in the chat, and the reference to the Stoic thinker is lovely. There's another Stoic thought about that, which is that if you can attribute to others positive motivations, as soon as you start to think that you are motivated somehow nobly, but other people, half of humanity, has ignoble motives and are somehow motivated to cause harm, then you're at a point of you've completely otherized others, and there's no way that you're going to come together. And that is also another important Stoic thought. One of the popular culture motifs that drove this home to me was a song in the 1980s by Sting, with the line, "I hope the Russians love their children too," where the notion of people who had been so vilified to us, and living in this evil empire, and you reframe that and saying, look, they want the same things in life that we do, and having that as a point of departure, I think really is helpful. I think if we come across as sanctimonious and self-righteous, it's going to be very difficult to attract people who will see us as not welcoming, not open-minded, and as Buku you had said, not really prepared to learn because we think we have all the answers already. And I think that those are some of the big challenges for us as Radar, because it's tempting. People, I see how easy it is for me, for others to believe that somehow we have a monopoly of what's right, what's just, what's appropriate, and then the way that we engage with others is actually not open-minded and is somewhat judgmental on our part. So and the reality, just also, by the way, saying something that is explicit, is that historically the majority of people in anesthesiology and in surgical disciplines tend to be more on the right wing of the political spectrum in the United States. That's just a fact. So I think that it is also something that we need to be aware of if we want to engage our specialty meaningfully. And we can't say that we're excluding that broad swathe of our colleagues who have a lot of value, and I think are committed to many of the same things that, and I'm not making any assumptions about anybody's politics here. I tend to be a bit more left and liberal in my own thinking, but that doesn't matter. I think that that's dissociable from what we're discussing over here. And I think that with an initiative like RADAR shouldn't be politically aligned.
Yeah, thank you for those thoughts, right? And the data would support it, actually, that diversity of thought are going to make our teams stronger. We're actually going to be more innovative, more creative, more successful with diversity of thought. A bunch of us who all think the same way together are not going to get as far. And so absolutely, I think continually emphasizing that important point is key. Scott, I have a question for you then about inclusivity. I think we talk about DEI all the time, but really people are just talking about diversity, right? The equity and inclusivity seem to fall to the background because we don't know what to do with them. Could you just touch upon some times in your life where you feel like you've actually been able to increase inclusivity? What that looked like? What were some actionable steps where you could say, oh, we made it more inclusive environment because we did this?
Yeah, just to carry over in the same conversation, the idea that we're all better because we have more diversity in the group creates some level of extra work and discomfort. It's very easy to sit with people who think, feel, and have the same experiences as you and have a conversation. The problem is that that's incredibly limiting in your ability to understand what's going on in the world from broader perspectives and different perspectives. It's very difficult to come to really good decisions with creative ideas that come from more perspectives and come from other ideas that didn't grow up in the same group. And that's the good part of it. The difficult or challenging or effort-filled part of that is that I have to be more conscious about what I say. And that's not just verbal things, because my automatic thoughts and things that I say have come to me built over now decades of interactions, both positive and negative interactions. And I've got this pattern of things that I can call on as automatic in the way that, we can fill in the text message, like my brain automatically fills in what happens next. And some of those things are not conducive to a good group function. Some of those things that happen because of the biases that are built into me, because of my experiential heuristics, are going to create friction in some settings. And if it's a group setting, I could create friction with any of the other 7 people in this group or team. And so that's a lot of awareness. That's a lot of sensitivity to it. Not only that, but because of all the things I'm ignorant of, I won't even recognize it a fair amount of the time when I've done this. And I have to be in a setting in which there's tremendous trust to imagine someone telling me this afterward. This is so unlikely for someone to stop in the middle of a group meeting of a whole bunch of different perspectives and brains and say, hey, that thing that you just said, what did you mean by that? Or what's the implication of that? And so in that, there is a lot more work in a diverse group. The question being then, what's and we know there's a value to it, but the question being then, what does it take for that group to function at its best? What does it take for people in that group to feel the level of safety to both bring themselves and also to interact with one another so that everyone can continue to bring themselves and that we don't shut down conversation and we don't otherize people within the group? And that is really where the challenge comes for inclusivity. The idea of not only am I playing a role as contributing to whatever we're understanding or analyzing or planning, et cetera, but I'm also playing a role in creating a safe environment in which we can share and be sharing freely, but understanding that there are going to be some toes that we're going to bump into and that we're going to have to apologize occasionally in a variety of subtle or not so subtle ways. And that is inclusivity, right? Inclusivity is when I can bring myself, especially if I can bring large parts of myself. And ideally, you bring your whole self, but nobody can ever really, picture a place where they bring their whole selves to a diverse group. That's so far still elusive to us. The sense that I get when I feel more included, the sense that I get when I feel both welcome and valued for what I bring, is a sense of belonging. A sense that I belong there, that I am not only welcome there, but I'm wanted there. And that requires someone else. I don't just bring that myself. Now, as a tall, white guy of a certain age growing up in the US, I have a natural sense of belonging in almost every space that is not universal. And so I do have a level of comfort, even in this room, where I don't have the same level of lived experience and legitimacy in the fields that I, am considered to have some expertise in, as many of the people that we're speaking with. And in that setting, I can sort of force myself into it. But the truth of the matter is that I also needed the IARS to invite me. I also need others to remind me, to validate me, to help me to feel like that what I'm contributing here is worthwhile and worth the effort of, potentially putting my foot in my mouth occasionally, or other kinds of challenges that go with it. Tracy, are you still hands up there?
No, I'm sorry.
No worries, no worries. Buki, all yours.
Yes. I just want to piggyback on what you just said. The importance of lived experiences and being made to feel welcome, because in reality, it is often the identities that are projected onto you that are very, very consequential. And why do I say that? I'll tell you a little personal story about myself. I grew up in Nigeria. I was born in Nigeria, where I did not know I was a Black man until I arrived in the UK, because there are no Black people in Africa, period. We had other ways of people sorting along ethnicity or whatever. Certainly, if I was a Black man, my parents didn't tell me. My primary school teacher didn't tell me. That never came up in medical school. The only thing my parents told me is, hey, if you just make sure you're in the top 5% of wherever you find yourself, and you're going to be fine. And that's what was stuck in my head until I arrived in England. And that was it. Hit me smack in the face that, oh, hold on a minute, that a whole different set of things that you have to navigate here. And then, of course, moving to the US, that is the story is very, very different. It's so your lived experiences are really, really important. And you can do a lot of self-affirmation until you're kind of blue in the face. But because no one is an island, you need the larger society to affirm you. And more often than not, those affirmations often come from the things that happens when you're not there. So that's the important. That's they talk about the the importance of, hey, it's one thing to be asked to the dance. It's another thing to be asked to dance. It's a totally different thing for them to play your kind of music. That is inclusivity.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think we are nearing the end of our time. I just want to thank everyone again for being here, for engaging, and for your thoughtful discussions and thoughts. And I look forward to partnering with you all as we continue to, welcome more people to the field of academic anesthesia. So thanks for all your work, and again, take care.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for a great session.